What is a server? How do you define a server? If you're talking about what can host files, what can host services, what can host websites or media, then a server is just a computer that sends electrical signals to be interpreted by another computer. Do you believe a computer being rack-mounted or made for enterprise has anything to do with its ability to run hosting software? Do you think that's air you're breathing now? Today, I'm going to answer what defines a server, or a NAS, or a router. It's time to free your mind. But I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Today, I'm going to attempt to answer a question I've received on nearly every single video I've ever posted about server hardware. And that is, what is a server? How do you make a server? And what hardware should you use to build a server? But more specifically, why you don't necessarily need server hardware to start learning about servers, and why building a home lab can be done with literally any hardware you might already have at home. Broadly speaking, there are two terms that we're going to be defining today. What is a server, and what is a client? The way I like to think about it is this. A server is any piece of hardware or software that hosts content for other systems. A client is any piece of hardware or software that consumes that content. And it's possible for any hardware or software to be both at the same time. Great, we are 60 seconds into this one and I'm already muddying the waters. When most people think of the word server, they picture a server rack filled to the brim with Intel Xeon and AMD EPYC CPUs with multiple dozens of CPU cores each, hundreds of gigabytes of memory, hundreds of terabytes of storage, fans whirling at 15,000 RPM. That image isn't incorrect, but hardware isn't what technically makes something a server. It's the software that those systems are running. As I said, a server is just a piece of hardware or software that hosts content for other systems. What hardware that's running on really doesn't matter. I'm trying to free your mind. To demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to show off some different hardware and software configurations with the all-new ZimaBlade. So consider this my review of this product. Zima did send out the ZimaBlade along with some of the expansion cards that I'll be using today, and I'll be using some of them to demonstrate different concepts when building a server, a gaming PC, a client, a NAS, a router, or anything else that you can possibly think of. Like all reviews, no money changed hands. Zima has no input over the content of this video, nor will they see it before it goes live on YouTube. The ZimaBlade is the latest mini PC from ZimaBoard, formerly known for their ZimaBoard mini PCs. And in fact, I have one of those right over here. But I guess we're going to have to refer to these as the ZimaBoard ZimaBoards from now on, if you wanted to name both the make and the model. But I digress. There are two different models of the ZimaBlade to choose from, and unlike previous models, the ZimaBlade uses an LPDDR3 SODIMM memory slot rather than soldering the RAM to the board, making them considerably more affordable than the previous model. Both models come with the ZimaBlade mini PC itself, along with the plastic and aluminum enclosure, a USB-C cable and power brick for providing power to it, as well as a SATA cable for plugging in a SATA drive. Now, just like the previous generation ZimaBoard, I hate the decision to only include the single SATA adapter, as they sell the dual SATA adapter for $10, and it's a proprietary cable that's required to use both SATA ports that are on the ZimaBlade. So this should be included by default, as there's really no additional cost to produce this cable versus this cable. It's just an extra $10 money grab. The ZimaBlade 3760 comes equipped with an Intel Apollo Lake Celeron N3350. It's a 2-core, 2-threaded CPU with a base clock of 1.1 GHz and a turbo of 2.4 GHz, and it has a max TDP of just 6 watts. There's also the ZimaBlade 7700, running an Intel Apollo Lake Celeron J3455. This one has 4 cores and 4 threads, with a base clock of 1.5 GHz and a max turbo of 2.3, and a slightly higher TDP of 10 watts. Now, these are not the newest CPUs in Intel's lineup by any stretch of the imagination, first debuting all the way back in 2016. But it's hard to argue with the price point the ZimaBlade was able to hit by using them. $64 for the ZimaBlade 3760, and just $96 for the ZimaBlade 7700. Even the dual-core N3350 is faster than the quad-core Raspberry Pi 4, and considering that it also includes the case, a heatsink, and power delivery, even after you add an 8GB stick of memory, it actually winds up being cheaper as well. Both models of the ZimaBlade dropped the dual Ethernet of the ZimaBoard in favor of a single gigabit Ethernet port, and I think that's actually the right move to bring costs down overall at retail. Both support up to 16GB of LPDDR3 and come equipped with 32GB of eMMC on board for installing your OS. Both CPUs are also equipped with Intel HD 500 graphics and support QuickSync video encoding as well as decoding. There's also a PCI Express 2.0 x4 expansion for adding pretty much anything you can plug into them, from storage controllers to network cards to video cards, turning these single-board computers into, well, a client for consuming content or a server for hosting it. To define what a server is, let's talk about different types of servers, along with the PC that prompted this entire video subject, the AUStar NAS Router Mini PC. What makes it a NAS, what makes it a router, and what makes it a mini PC? The honest answer here? Absolutely nothing but the name, which is entirely marketing jargon. The AUStar is a mini PC in that it's smaller than average form factors. It has 2 SATA drive bays on top, meaning you can put 2 drives into it. It's being named for the feature set and a possible use case that the manufacturer intends. And that's not uncommon in the PC world. NVIDIA has their GeForce lineup, which is designed to play games, but nothing stops those cards from running CAD or encoding video streams. The only thing really required to make something a NAS is the ability to store files and share those files over a network. Do you know what makes a PC capable of being a NAS? Literally any PC today that has storage and network connectivity. A gaming PC running Windows can host files for other PCs. If you've ever set up a share folder, you've created a server. A Raspberry Pi can be a NAS. You don't even need to attach hard drives to it. Just share the files directly off of its microSD card. It doesn't have redundancy, it's not fast, but it's technically a NAS if it's hosting files. Technically, if you've ever copied files from your smartphone onto your PC over Wi-Fi, your phone was acting as a NAS. Both models of the ZimaBlade have 2 SATA ports right here on the front, and you can buy this handy little $10 adapter to plug in both drives at the same time. Now, Zima will also sell you a little drive chassis so you can hold 2 hard drives, and the ZimaBlade just kind of sits right here on top. It's not elegant, it's not pretty, but make no mistake about it, this still qualifies as a NAS. If you hadn't caught on by now, a NAS is defined by the software that a server runs, not the hardware that it's running on. Running a NAS, I will typically install TrueNAS. It's an operating system that makes it easy to configure your storage devices, set up file shares, configure share permissions, and keep storage secure, either through RAID redundancy or by setting up backups. So, if you've been paying attention, what makes devices like the recently reviewed AUStar or the ZimaBlade a NAS device? The fact that you can load up a hard drive or 2 and run software that lets you share files. It's as simple as that. How large of a NAS you want to build is completely up to you. And as you can see from builds I've done before, the sky is the limit as far as scale is concerned. Now, while the ZimaBlade does have 2 SATA ports, it may not be enough capacity for critics out there, and you know who you are, to consider it a NAS device. To that I say, this is an ASMedia 1166, and it's a 16-port SATA controller on a PCI Express card. And if you watch carefully, I'm going to transform this ZimaBlade into a 16-bay NAS server. Like that. This generic PC is now something that's capable of controlling 16 SATA drives. Boom! Now it's a NAS, although you're going to need to figure out how to power all those drives, since the ZimaBlade won't provide enough power to 16 hard drives. But it's capable of it now. Another term that gets thrown around when talking about servers is routers. In fact, it's one of the terms I see most often on mini PCs that are sold on Amazon. But as we learned with NAS, the hardware requirements of a router are quite simple if you break them down. According to the Oxford Dictionary definition, a router is a device that forwards data packets to the appropriate parts of a computer network. That's it. As far as how a router is used, we're typically talking about an incoming internet connection and distributing that out to client devices over a network. At a basic level, that means we need 2 network ports, one for the incoming internet connection and a second one for the internal facing part of the network. So by that definition, any computer with dual network ports that can run routing software can function as a router. As far as software goes, typically pfSense or OpenSense are what I see running in the wild. If you're not doing anything exotic with traffic routing or rules, the dual-core Celeron N3350 is likely enough for routing gigabit internet in a home or small business environment. But darn, the ZimaBlade only has a single gigabit Ethernet port. Well, this is a 4-port 2.5 gigabit Ethernet controller on a PCI Express card. And if you watch carefully, I'm going to transform the ZimaBlade into a 4-port router. Just like that. Now the ZimaBlade has enough network ports to be considered a router, so long as you can install the software to make it all work. So I've been talking about what makes a server, but what if we talk about clients for a second? Again, my definition of a client is any piece of hardware or software that consumes content. That can mean accessing a website from a PC makes it a web client. Watching a video makes it a media client. Playing a game makes it a gaming client. And if anyone knows anything about playing games on hardware not traditionally used in gaming, the very first video I ever published to this channel was about using decommissioned server hardware for gaming. And I think it's really here that I can drive the point home that hardware has little to no bearing over the function of a PC. While Xeon CPUs were sold as server CPUs, and they were never intended to be used in gaming, there's also nothing stopping them from running games. Most of what separates server CPUs from conserver CPUs is marketing, along with some features that might help specific use cases. More cores for servers and higher clock speeds for consumers, for example. But there's nothing that prevents a server CPU or GPU from playing games, or a consumer CPU from hosting files and serving up media. Now, I'm not going to connect an RTX 4070 Ti to the ZimaBlade and tell you now it's a gaming PC, as that's too impractical even for me. But what is a gaming PC? By definition, it's any computer that can play games. And those games don't have to be modern. One of my favorite gaming computers that I've built over the last couple years, you actually never saw the final version of. It's my Retro Rocket, and it's currently running a Sandy Bridge i7, 8GB of DDR2, a 512GB SSD, and an NVIDIA GT 740 graphics card. So modern games are pretty much a no-go, but I built this PC to run Windows XP and my collection of retro games from the late 90s and early 2000s, meaning it's actually overkill for its intended purpose. Again, the least practical use case of the ZimaBlade is going to be as a dedicated gaming PC. Although, at $64, the dual-core Celeron model can run every 8-bit through 64-bit console out there, making it an excellent emulation PC. Also, a low-power PC running something like Zorin OS or Chimera OS would make an excellent retro PC console as well, running PC games from the late 90s and early 2000s on a modern Linux operating system through the help of Proton and Wine. The ZimaBlade is a fantastic low-power PC, and its use case is as wide as your imagination is. But the same can be said about any computer. PC parts are nothing more than Lego for computer nerds. And that's really what this video is meant to be about. Getting outside the bounds of what makes a server, or a PC, or a NAS, or a router, or even a gaming PC. When we're talking about x86 64 PC hardware, they're all capable of running the same software. There's nothing stopping you from installing Windows on a 1U Xeon server and playing games, or from installing Proxmox on a ZimaBlade and running virtual machines. Some hardware is better suited for specific tasks, but they're all based on standards, which means hardware is pretty much interchangeable. In PC building, it seems there are an infinite number of unwritten rules around what hardware can do certain things. We make rules for PC building around what type of cooler to use, what graphics card to install, and what software you should run. What you must learn is these rules are no different than the Lego I was just talking about. Some can be bent, others can be broken. Let's start broad with a topic gaming enthusiasts love to make up rules for: cooling. A consumer motherboard and CPU needs either a large air cooler or some form of water cooling. Servers require high airflow and massive amounts of static pressure. The ZimaBlade is a proper PC running an Intel x86-64 CPU. But it only runs at 10 watts, and it doesn't even have a proper heatsink. The CPU die is actually directly touching the aluminum back panel here, with a thin layer of thermal paste in between them. There's no heatsink fins on this, there's no fan, yet this PC is able to stay completely cool and quiet. A top-flight gaming PC with a 250-watt CPU and a 600-watt graphics card needs as much cooling and performance as you can possibly provide. That means a mesh front panel to maximize airflow, proper orientation of all of your components to prevent hot spots or heat bleed from one component to another. You need to even out the distribution of intake and exhaust fans to have a slightly positive pressure inside your case, maintaining airflow while also minimizing dust buildup. Of course, a 65-watt CPU and a 75-watt graphics card can run in cases with little to no airflow, as there's just not as much heat to pull away from the system. Do you remember my Xbox One S PC case mod, where I stuffed a computer inside of an Xbox One S? That's a 65-watt CPU and a 70-watt GPU, and it runs perfectly cool and quiet all the time, with no case fans whatsoever. A rack mount 2-use server that draws 1,000 watts needs 12 fans at 15,000 RPM to push as much air as possible through the chassis. Humidity in a server room needs to be kept in check at between 40 and 50% to prevent static buildup on components due to the insane volume of air that's moving through the server. Cable management on both sides of a rack can inhibit airflow and must be kept in check. With all those fans, vibration damping needs to be considered to avoid damage to hard drives. Of course, I also have a completely full server rack full of equipment, but my entire rack is drawing around 400 watts in total right now. My main file server is currently running a Threadripper 2950X, a workstation CPU that doesn't even have ECC memory installed, and my 2 VM hosts are rocking Tiger Lake mobile CPUs on Elysian motherboards that I sourced from AliExpress. How many of those server and airflow rules do you think apply to my particular use case? My VM servers have two 80mm fans at the front, an Intel box cooler on the CPU, and no exhaust fans. And they run perfectly fine. Along these same lines, there are unwritten rules for server software and hardware configurations. For example, I've heard time and time again that Realtek NICs are absolutely terrible for routers, and make sure you have either Intel or Broadcom. If you run a file server, you have to run ECC. Consumer hardware isn't meant to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week like it is in servers. If you want to run servers at home, while it's fun to get into used enterprise hardware, server racks, and all of the fun stuff that I get to play with around here, there's also nothing stopping you from using something else for the same purpose. Your home router isn't slinging enough data to overwhelm a Realtek NIC. ECC only protects your data in flight before it's even written to disk, and file transfers in pretty much every OS have checksums to verify data integrity on both ends. Unless you're running a multi-terabyte SQL database in your Homelab with hundreds of simultaneous connections and clients, ECC offers little to no extra protection for your Plex library. And finally, the reason I brought all this extra hardware onto the desk with me today is that I've ran everything from Raspberry Pis to used enterprise gear to Orange Pis with an RK3588 to RISC-V to AliExpress motherboards to literally brand new Intel Xeon and AMD EPYC systems in my server rack. And none of it ever has had a problem running 24/7, dutifully serving whatever content that I've asked of it. The rules that we place on hardware typically come from the top ends of our experience and expectations. If you have 500 clients hitting a file server, you'd better have ECC in that box. If you have an RTX 4090 in your gaming PC, I'd recommend water cooling and a mesh front at the front of the case. But those rules don't apply to every single situation and every single PC build that's ever been done. And the further down the power band you get, the less the rules apply. See the passively cooled ZimaBlade with a PCI Express card that hangs off the side. So, what makes a server a server? You do. Well, more technically the software does, but it's whatever you do with it. It's the same thing that makes any pile of parts into a gaming PC, a router, a content creator's workstation, a retro gaming machine, or a storage server. If you're trying to get into running servers yourself, ignore the rules, ignore the Redditors, ignore the noise and the gatekeepers. Go out and build something cool from whatever parts that you have available. Install Proxmox, or Unraid, or TrueNAS, or Rocky Linux, or XCP-ng. The point of this hobby is to experiment, not to just do what everyone else expects you to do with the hardware that you have. If you're interested in the ZimaBlade as a fantastic starting point to a home lab or a client PC, they are available for pre-order right now over on CrowdSupply. The dual-core ZimaBlade 3760 will run you $64, while the quad-core ZimaBlade 7700 is priced at $96. Units won't currently ship until January 2024, so you'll have plenty of time to plan out your low-power build. Links on where to find them are all down in the video description. You know what else is down in the video description? Links to craftcomputing.store, where you can find these fantastic nucleated pint glasses, coasters, and anything else that you need to start drinking like a pro. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on the social medias at Craft Computing, and again, if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is also down in the video description. That's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Beer for today is from Elysian Brewing up in Seattle, Washington. It is the Full Contact Hazy Imperial IPA, clocking in at 8.8%. This also comes in a 19.2 ounce can, which means it's good for two things: degreasing engines and killing brain cells. So the Elysian Full Contact Imperial Hazy IPA. I gotta say, this is one of the least hazy IPAs I've ever had. But that said, hazy has evolved more from a stylistic choice as far as aesthetics goes, and developed into a full flavor profile. And as far as the flavor, Elysian absolutely nailed this one. It is citrusy and hop aggressive right up front. The first thing you get is like orange, lemon peel, maybe a little zest of some kind, and it's super, super dry. And that actually makes way to a pretty decent and rich malt profile on the back end of this. And again, it's a very dry beverage, which leaves you wanting more, or wanting to pair it with a barbecue bacon cheeseburger or a greasy slice of pizza. Like, this is a fantastic beer to pair with the worst bar food you've ever had. And by worst, I mean best. Follow the White Rabbit and go pick one of these up.